My cheating wife planned a pregnancy with her affair partner, so I got the ultimate revenge. She thought I wouldn't find out, but I turned her world upside down. Now, she and her lover regret everything. Hey Reddit. I never imagined my marriage would come to this. I met my wife, Claire, in college. She was the light of my life, smart, beautiful, and someone I thought I could build a future with. We got married young and spent over a decade together, building what I thought was a solid foundation. But the cracks started to show when I noticed she became more distant. It wasn't just the usual ebb and flow of relationships, this felt deeper. At first, I blamed myself. I thought maybe I was too busy with work or too focused on other things to give her the attention she needed. I started taking her out on dates, cooking her favorite meals, and even planning small weekend getaways. But nothing worked. She always seemed distracted, glued to her phone, or finding excuses to spend time away from me. One day, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed repeatedly on the nightstand. I don't know what came over me, but I picked it up. The messages were from someone named Eric. They weren't outright romantic but had enough innuendo to make my stomach drop. Stuff like "last night was amazing and I can't wait until we're together again." My heart raced as I scrolled further. There were pictures too, nothing explicit but enough to confirm my worst fears. For days, I tried to process what I had seen. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, but another part wanted to gather more information. I decided to play it cool and started digging quietly. I installed a small tracker app on her phone and began monitoring her messages and calls. What I found was worse than I imagined. She wasn't just emotionally cheating, she was physically involved with Eric. And the cherry on top? They were actively discussing starting a family. Apparently, Eric didn't have kids of his own and always wanted them. Claire, despite telling me for years that she wasn't ready, had suddenly decided she wanted to try for a baby with him. They were even discussing timing and how to keep me in the dark until she could figure things out. I was furious. Betrayal is one thing, but the idea that she was planning to bring a child into this mess was too much. I knew I had to act, but I didn't want to confront her in anger. Instead, I decided to play the long game and get my revenge. The first thing I did was visit a lawyer. I wanted to know my options and how I could protect myself financially. We didn't have kids, but we owned a house together and had a few joint accounts. My lawyer was sharp and suggested I start moving my assets discreetly. I opened a separate bank account and slowly began transferring funds. I also gathered every piece of evidence. I had screenshots of her messages, pictures, and even audio recordings from the tracker app. Next, I reached out to Eric's wife. Yep, he was married too. I found her on social media and sent her a message explaining everything, complete with proof. She was devastated but grateful that I told her. Turns out, she had suspected something was going on but didn't have any concrete evidence. We decided to work together to expose them. While all this was happening, I acted like nothing was wrong. I still took Claire out, laughed at her jokes, and even pretended to be excited about the future. Meanwhile, Eric's wife and I were coordinating a plan. She confronted Eric first, which threw him completely off balance. He confessed to everything, not knowing that I was waiting for the right moment to strike on my end. The day of reckoning came during what Claire thought was a casual dinner at home. I made her favorite meal and even poured her a glass of wine. As we sat down, I slid an envelope across the table. She looked confused but opened it. Inside were the printed screenshots of her messages with Eric, along with a divorce agreement. Her face went pale. She tried to deny it at first, but I shut her down immediately. I told her I knew everything, how long it had been going on, their plans to have a baby, and all the lies she had told me. She started crying, begging me to let her explain, but I wasn't interested. I told her the marriage was over and that she had until the end of the week to move out. That wasn't the end, though. Eric's wife and I had one more trick up our sleeves. We sent all the evidence to their workplaces. Claire and Eric both worked at the same company, which had a strict policy against relationships between employees. They were both fired within days. Claire's life quickly fell apart. She moved in with a friend and tried reaching out to me multiple times, but I blocked her on everything. Meanwhile, Eric's wife filed for divorce and took him to the cleaners. The last I heard, he was living in a crappy apartment, trying to piece his life back together. As for me, I moved on. The divorce was finalized without much drama since I had all the evidence on my side. I sold the house and used the money to start fresh in a new city. It wasn't easy, but cutting ties with Claire was the best decision I ever made. People often ask if I regret how I handled things. The answer is no. Claire and Eric made their choices, and they had to face the consequences. Sometimes, karma needs a little push, and I was more than happy to give it to them. Update. First off, thanks to everyone who reached out after my initial post. The support has been overwhelming, and it's reassuring to know I'm not alone in this. A lot has happened since I first shared my story, and I wanted to provide an update. After serving Claire the divorce papers and confronting her about everything, I thought the worst part was over. I assumed she'd accept the consequences of her actions, pack up her things, and quietly leave my life. But I was wrong. Claire wasn't going to go down without a fight. In the immediate aftermath of our confrontation, Claire seemed stunned. For the first day or two, she walked around in a daze, barely speaking to me. I thought maybe the gravity of her actions had finally hit her. But then came the tears. Claire broke down one evening, sobbing uncontrollably and apologizing over and over again. She begged me to listen to her, claiming she had made a mistake and didn't want to lose everything we had built together. At first, her tears felt genuine, and a small part of me almost softened. But then I remembered the cold, calculated messages she had exchanged with Eric. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a one-time lapse in judgment. Claire had spent months lying to my face, planning a future with another man, and stealing from me emotionally and financially. I steeled myself and told her that no amount of tears would change the fact that she had destroyed our marriage. When her tears didn't work, Claire switched tactics. She started trying to guilt me into reconsidering the divorce. She brought up memories of our time together, reminding me of our wedding day, the trips we had taken, and the plans we had once made for the future. She asked me how I could throw all of that away. What she didn't seem to understand was that she was the one who had thrown it all away. Her actions had destroyed the foundation of trust and love that we had built. I told her as much, but she refused to accept it. Claire then began making promises to cut Eric out of her life completely, to go to therapy, and to do whatever it took to fix things. But I knew better. Her promises were just words, and I couldn't believe a single one of them anymore. The final straw came when she started trying to shift the blame onto me. One evening, she sat me down and said she felt unloved and neglected in our marriage. She claimed that I had been emotionally distant and that she had turned to Eric for comfort. Hearing her say those words made my blood boil. For months, I had gone out of my way to try to rekindle our relationship. I had planned date nights, surprised her with gifts, and even taken time off work to spend more time together. All the while, she had been sneaking around behind my back. I called her out on her lies, and she had the audacity to get defensive. She accused me of not understanding her needs and said that I had taken her for granted. It was a surreal moment, listening to her try to rewrite history to make herself the victim. I told her in no uncertain terms that her excuses were pathetic and that our marriage was over. During all of this, I was staying in touch with Sarah, Eric's wife. Sarah was going through her own roller coaster of emotions, and we supported each other as best we could. She told me that Eric had been trying to downplay his relationship with Claire, claiming it was just a fling and that he didn't mean to hurt her. But the evidence told a different story. Eric and Claire had been planning a life together, discussing everything from living arrangements to starting a family. Sarah and I decided to keep each other updated as we navigated our respective situations. Having someone who truly understood what I was going through was a huge comfort. But even with her support, I couldn't help but feel the weight of everything. What made it worse was Claire's attempts to control the narrative. She started spreading rumors among our mutual friends, telling them that I was emotionally abusive and that my behavior had driven her to cheat. It was infuriating. I had spent years being a supportive husband, and now she was trying to tarnish my reputation to save face. Fortunately, I had anticipated this. Before confronting Claire, I had already confided in a few close friends and shared the truth about what had happened. I also had all the evidence, screenshots, bank statements, and audio recordings to back up my side of the story if it ever came to that. Most of our friends sided with me, but a few bought into Claire's lies. I decided not to waste my energy trying to convince them otherwise. Despite everything Claire was doing to make my life difficult, I stayed focused on moving forward. My lawyer and I were making good progress on the divorce, and I was beginning to see a light at the end of the tunnel. I started looking at new places to live and even began reconnecting with hobbies I had abandoned during the chaos of the past few months. But just as I thought things were starting to settle down, I stumbled upon something that made me realize the storm was far from over. Another update. After dealing with Claire's attempts to paint herself as the victim, I thought I had seen the worst of her manipulations. I was wrong. As I worked with my lawyer to finalize the divorce, I started combing through our joint finances. I wanted to ensure there were no surprises when it came time to divide our assets. That's when I found something suspicious. Over the past year, there had been multiple transfers to an unfamiliar bank account. The amounts weren't massive, but they were consistent, small enough to avoid raising alarm, but frequent enough to add up over time. At first, I thought it might have been an error, or maybe Claire had opened a new account without telling me. But as I dug deeper, I discovered the account wasn't solely in her name. It was a joint account shared between Claire and Eric. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Claire hadn't just betrayed me emotionally and physically, she had been stealing from me to fund her secret life with Eric. They'd been using our joint finances to save for what they referred to in their messages as their new beginning. My hands shook with rage as I read through their conversations. They talked about using the money to get an apartment together, travel, and even prepare for a future child. It was like a slap in the face. Claire and I had spent years working hard to save for our own future, and now she was using those funds to build a life with her affair partner. I immediately forwarded all the information to my lawyer. He assured me that this would strengthen my case significantly and could even absolve me from having to give her any financial support during the divorce. That was a small relief, but it didn't lessen the sting of her betrayal. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Claire hadn't just cheated on me, she had stolen from me, lied to me, and used me to bankroll her fantasy with Eric. The level of deceit was almost incomprehensible. I reached out to Sarah again and shared what I'd found. She was just as furious as I was. Sarah told me she had been gathering her own evidence against Eric for their divorce proceedings. She also revealed that Eric had been trying to shift the blame onto Claire, claiming the idea to siphon money was hers. This new revelation made Sarah and me even more determined to expose the full extent of their betrayal. We decided to pool our resources and work together to ensure they face the consequences of their actions. But then, just as I thought we were closing in on the end of this nightmare, something unexpected happened. Sarah called me late one night, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and excitement. She said she had discovered something that could blow this whole situation wide open. She wouldn't tell me what it was over the phone, but she promised it would change everything. Trust me, this is far from over.